Welcome back to Flying Upstream, free spirits. Today's guest is someone whose story is almost too wild to believe until you hear it straight from him. Andrew Profaci is a cult survivor, author, and speaker whose life has been featured on HBO, Vice, and Dateline NBC. He was once known inside the infamous Love Has Won cult as Father God. His memoir, The War on Love, exposes the truth behind that experience. But what's even more powerful is what Andrew has built since then, a life of truth, clarity, and real healing. This episode is about losing yourself, waking up, and coming back stronger than ever. I'm honored to have him here today. Andrew, welcome to Flying Upstream.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm honored to be here. Thank you for having me. Thank you to everybody who's listening, watching. I appreciate you being here. I intend to pour out my heart and soul for you guys, and I hope you really enjoy your time here with us. Thank you for
Awesome.
having me.
All right, so let's start way back when, before it all began. Take us back to the car accident when you were only 18. How did that experience crack open your whole world?
Wow. You know, I they say I was conscious for the whole thing, cutting us out of the car, stuck in there for an hour and a half. My friend who was driving, unfortunately, was killed instantly, laying on top of me, but my brain won't let me have that memory. Thankfully, I'm more than happy not to remember that. But I would say I woke up when I fully came to. I was in the hospital, actually in the middle of the CAT scan in the trauma room, and I would say I woke up in that trauma room a completely different person than had gotten in that car just several hours earlier. I had been, if you read the book, The War on Love, it goes into, my childhood. And I was on a path where I was going down the wrong road. I was looking in all the wrong places for validation, for a sense of brotherhood, for a sense of purpose. And that accident really, shook me awake. And the consequences of it, I'd broken my pelvis in 9, 10 places, completely shattered, had to learn to walk again. Really gave me the time to consider the path I had been on. And I made a promise to Jim, my best friend who had passed away, that I wouldn't let his death, his sacrifice, if you will, be in vain. And that's when I really began to change my life path, and I opened myself up to God, to Jesus Christ, to spirituality, and to begin asking those questions of why me? Why was I saved? Why did I deserve to live through this horrific car accident that should have taken my life? And that was the first fork in the road, so to speak, that led me down a path towards spirituality, which would eventually bring me into um, other topics that we're going to be getting into here in just a moment.
Yes. Okay, first of all, I cannot even imagine the level of emotional trauma that you've gone through, let alone physical, coming out of that. And I know that doctors at the time had prescribed you Percocet. And, way back when, this was like no big deal. Addiction was not something that was part of the topic. What was it like falling into that and what pulled you out?
Yeah, this is early 2000s. So the accident happened October 28th, 2002 in New Jersey. And, back then, doctors were still prescribing painkillers to an 18-year-old, like, no big deal. There was no talk about, what I needed to be concerned about as far as addiction. No, I had no idea what withdrawal was until I first experienced it. And nobody warned me. There were no support groups. There was no, go talk to this person when I pull your script and just stop giving it to you one day. And that's what forced me onto the street, because I was running from the withdrawal, which was always on my heels. And I didn't want to face it after 2 years of being prescribed, strong Percocets every day. The withdrawal was intense, and it scared me. So I spent a long time running from it every day, and looking for it on the street. It was an incredibly difficult thing to deal with mentally. It really broke me down. It turned me into an addict, a person I didn't want to be. And it would take some time, but that was another thing that eventually woke me up and made me realize that I wasn't the person that I wanted to be. And um, I eventually started taking steps in the right direction to, regain my authenticity and my true self. It
Yeah.
just took some time.
So, gosh, okay. So you go through this terrible withdrawal, you get through it like a champ. And after this, as you've alluded to, you did have some deep spiritual experiences that changed everything for you. What were those moments like, and how did they shift your understanding of your reality?
Wow, they changed my worldview in many ways. They essentially destroyed my worldview and my thought of what the world was like, what was possible. I was raised Roman Catholic. I received communion, confirmation. I went to CCD. I was in a place where I was kind of leaning away from the Catholic Church. Here I am looking at a pope sitting on a throne made of gold, yet he's talking about, feeding the poor. And I do the research and I realize, we could easily feed the poor in every year, every day, no problem. I mean, with just the food that we throw in the trash can every day, um, and it kind of moved me in a different direction, looking for other answers, and I went down, spirituality, and these experiences I had were in meditation. It was actually suggested to me by someone that I try a specific meditation where I stare into a flame and I write my most important questions about life on a notepad. And I put the notepad down in front of me and I stare into this flame for 5 minutes until I can begin to see an aura. And then I was to close my eyes and think of the questions on the notepad. And the first question was, what does all of this mean? Why do I find myself on this road to spirituality? And I swear I closed my eyes, and within seconds, with my eyes closed, it was like I was looking at a picture of a woman sitting in a wheelchair with her feet up on the stirrups, pregnant, wearing a hospital gown. I couldn't see her face, it was just a neck down. And I'm looking at this image, and the words just popped into my mind that said, "This is the pre birth process. Do you understand?" And it totally snapped me out of my meditation. I opened my eyes. I was like, "Whoa, this is different. I've meditated before, but I've never seen anything like that. I've never received a message like that." And I'm sitting there thinking about it, and within just a couple seconds, I hear audibly with my ears, I hear, "Andrew, Andrew, can you hear me?" And I'm turning around. I lived alone, just me and my dog. There was nobody there. And I'm saying, "Yes, I can hear you. Who are you? What is this?" No response, nothing. And that totally just that shook me awake. I didn't know anything like this was possible. Uh, it was like I was being gifted in a way. When I look back on it, it was being gifted an experience that was showing me, there are answers to, or there are parts of life that maybe we don't understand. That there is something beyond the normal, the mundane, and that made me really want to keep searching down this path of spirituality. And because it kind of crashed my worldview, it also made me really susceptible to people who claim to have the answers. And then we start to move into what was at the time the First Contact ground crew team and Love Has Won. I'd come across their website, and one thing led to another, and I thought I was being led in the direction of these people who could explain what these experiences were and shared a common worldview that I was now trying to rebuild.
How did you first come across Love Has Won, and what made it feel like a place that you belonged?
So I first came across them. They had a website where they aggregated different spiritual articles every day, almost like a news site, and made it easy for me to find all of the articles I wanted to read in one place. And they also had a chat room. after a few days of reading their website, I decided to go in the chat room. And I go in the chat room, and it's bustling. There's 20, 30 people in there, all chatting it up, talking spirituality, talking about things that were interesting to me. People were talking about their own issues with their life, their own struggles that they're going through. And then there were a couple people in there who seemed a little bit more adept, almost like leaders, and they were, giving answers and, trying to help these people. And one of these people had a screen name of Mother God. And she seemed very kind, very lovely, pretty. She was being very helpful, answering people's questions. And I found like it was, I had found my tribe in a sense. These were people who were asking similar questions that I wanted answers to. And I decided to start hanging around that chat room, and I became a regular over the course of a couple weeks. And that's how I initially found them.
And so from there, you ended up joining as a member and then eventually stepped into a central role as father guide.
That's right.
Tell me more about what that title meant inside the group and how did it feel to carry that spiritual authority?
Well, I didn't expect to ever play a central role. I joined thinking I'd be some guy in the background. There were 5 or 6 other people living with her at the time in that house that were in the chat room, helping people. And I anticipated I would take my marketing skills and, help, rebuild the websites and, increase our traffic and get this message of love and light, of community, of awakening out to more people. That was my intention. And when I got there, first I walked in, I remember thinking to myself, oh my God, I made a huge mistake because the house was a mess. It was a wreck. There were dishes everywhere in the sink. It was like a bomb had gone off in the house. Amy herself was slumped over in a chair, drunk, drooling. This was not the same person I had seen on the other side of a computer screen when I showed up after a plane ride and a 5-hour taxi drive south into the middle of nowhere, Colorado. She was in a completely incoherent state, couldn't even talk to me. And I thought to myself, okay, this is not what I thought it was going to be. And within a couple of days, she had told me that I had a much more important role to play. She took me aside in the bedroom and sat me down and told me that I was going to be the vessel for this Father God consciousness to come into the planet. It has never been in a human vessel before, and that I was supposed to play this role and get rid of my ego and make it possible for this consciousness to come into my body. And it was like, being hit by a ton of bricks. It was not something I wanted. It scared the living daylights out of me. I had so many questions I didn't understand. Part of me wanted to acquiesce to anything she said and follow her because she was the leader. She was the more adept spiritual guide. She was the one who was going to help me to grow and find my growth. And here I am being told something that totally didn't make sense. And she told me essentially, don't worry, just follow what I say, do what I say, get rid of your ego, and everything is going to be okay. And I just remember feeling completely overwhelmed and unworthy for this challenge. I was in a place where I thought, well, maybe I don't quite understand how everything works. I'm going to give this a shot because my intentions are to help. And even though this sounds really crazy, maybe there's something here that I don't understand. And she said, I'm going to leave you here to consider it, think about it. I know it's heavy, you know, but, I want you to really think about it. And that was after I asked her about the 4 or 5 other father gods, by the way, who had come before me and why I was going to be number 5 or 6 and, what happened to them. And of course, she had a story for how they turned out to be demons and, they were just throwing the story off. And how I was the real one true Father God. And it didn't really make sense. I didn't really believe. But as she's walking out of the room, she turns to me and says, "Oh, and by the way, when you're ready to make love, let me know." And turns around and leaves the room.
Whoa.
leaving me there stunned, scared out of my mind, thinking this is not what I signed up for. I had no idea what to do. I was terrified in that moment, and that's how the whole Father God thing got dropped on me. And I
Wow.
was like a fish out of water. I had no idea what to do.
That's wild.
Yeah.
Yeah, just to show up at this place, it's not what you think it is, and then to be told out of the blue, you actually have an incredibly important role, and we're gonna go make love. Just let me know when you're ready. With someone who's, yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
almost a stranger, right? So,
I've never been propositioned like that ever. It was very different, and you know, I would come to learn that she had a very promiscuous personality, and she. Uh, she really just attached the father God title to the next man she had her eyes set on. She believed she was mother God, so you know, naturally, any man that she was attracted to had to be Father God. That's what I would eventually come to find out. Although I spent the first few weeks trying to not let my fears and my doubts control me, but instead just submit to what she was trying to tell me, thinking, you know, she knew a lot more about this than I did. But it didn't take very long for me to figure out that that wasn't the case. The moment when I figured it out was actually quite funny. But yeah, that was how the Father God thing began, although it didn't last long.
so tell us a little bit more about your relationship with her. You've said that you fought daily with her as Mother God, but
Yes,
you had a relationship with her at the same time. What was it
yes.
like living in that emotional and spiritual contradiction?
It was like being in a pressure cooker every day. I literally felt, you know, like if you've ever been in a relationship where things are really going haywire, you know, that pressure in your chest where you just feel that tightness in your chest and in your head all day long. You're spinning, you know, there's a million thoughts flying through your mind. I would wake up that way, I would go to sleep that way and feel that way all day long. I didn't understand what was going on. I was trying to make sense of it all until it all came together in a few ways and a few events that happened where I really gained clarity. But what I had to do was find balance. And the way I did that was by separating Amy Carlson from Mother God. So I saw on one half you have the Mother God persona, and then I had Amy Carlson, the person who, you know, by the time I'm speaking out against her, this is 3, 4 months that after I've been there, we had begun pretty close, and I had learned or grown to care about her very much. And what I did was, while I really fought to dismantle the mother god persona with every opportunity that I was given. She claimed to be perfect. She claimed to have no ego. This is what made her possible to be mother god. Meanwhile, she was an alcoholic. She was a human being, so she wasn't perfect. There were plenty of opportunities for me to hold the mirror up to her and say, "Look, you claim to have no ego and be perfect, but you know, here are the contradictions." And I would do this on a daily basis and show this to her, but at the same time, while railing against the mother god persona, I would still serve Amy, the human being, like a queen. Like I would serve any woman who I loved and cared about, whether it be the little things like, you know, getting her a glass of water, knowing she's thirsty, or, you know, doing her laundry for her, making her dinner, you know, pulling her chair out for her, opening a car door for her, you know, just being there for her and supporting her human needs the best way I could. And just because I was, you know, really fighting against Mother God on a daily basis didn't mean that the person Amy Carlson was didn't deserve my love and my admiration and my support. So I really found a balance between the two. And that's how I went on every day. And that's how I was able to stay in the cult and at the same time work to dismantle it on a daily basis, is because I found that balance.
Mm. So you really created your own coping mechanism to to find the balance and get through your day essentially. Um, you know,
Yes.
and most people who are in cults, they don't get out on their own, but you actually woke yourself up while still inside. What
Yes.
made you start questioning everything and seeing that chips kind of fall away?
Yeah. Well, at first I witnessed, lots of control mechanisms. A lot of things that you hear about, like love bombing. But there were others that haven't been named. She would do things like I even named a bunch of them myself. She would do what I call piggybacking, which is if you told the story about something that happened to you, like I told her of my spiritual experience, she would piggyback onto them, saying, "Oh yeah, that was me. Actually, that was my higher self, calling out to you." Or she would do something called past polishing, where she would tell stories of her past but weave in how all of these stories always meant that she was intended to be mother god. She would always weave those in. She would do something like ether dumping is another name I gave to her, where she would blame any outbursts that she had on one of her guides, say, "Oh, that wasn't me acting that way. That was one of my guides who was upset with you." She thought Robin Williams was one of her guides. Crazy enough. Um, she would say, "Oh, that was Robin. That wasn't me." Totally avoiding accountability and responsibility for her own actions. So these things, added up, and I began to see them. But we did have a couple really big events that actually gave me the proof. One of them was a shroom trip she wanted us to do because she was growing impatient that I hadn't become Father God yet. So the whole team took mushrooms, and I was given an incredible amount to, quote, grease the skids and make it easier for me to allow this consciousness to come into my body. And took the mushrooms, and I must have been out of it for about 20 minutes to a half hour. And then I came to, the whole team is sitting in the bedroom, lined against, sitting on the floor, lined against the wall. One of them's taking notes because she made this a huge deal, told everyone, "Today's the day, Father God's coming." And she's on the bed, Michael's there on the bed. And I remember waking up, coming to and look up, and Amy's hovering over me, watching me intently to see what would happen. And if I had become Father God, and I remember I just started laughing uncontrollably. And she starts looking at the team and they're looking at each other like, well, what's so funny? Because in my mind, I thought to myself, uh-oh, still Andrew. So we've got a problem here. And it was in that moment that I realized the titles, the mother God thing, the father God thing, it was all absolutely BS. That we had totally convinced ourselves of these titles were true, and it really wasn't. I didn't tell them in that moment that that's what I realized. I just kind of played it off and let it go. She ended up telling the followers, "Oh, it worked. Father God's integrating, but he's not, totally here yet." She always had a way of explaining herself out of a corner. She was very good at that and well practiced, of course. And that was one way. And real quickly, the other way I was able to really recognize that these things were not in alignment and not true was because we had a team member, and this is in the book. This is probably the climax of the book. A team member who was very good with computers, who created an extremely elaborate deception using computer programs and software to pretend to be these 5 or 6 beings who joined our chat room and created these incredible experiences for our chat members, made it seem like they knew everything about us. We had no idea it was somebody who was in the room with us. So how could somebody know what only team members would know? Just totally took control of the team. He used it to elevate himself among the team, used it to actually make himself the healer, get Amy alone when she was drunk as the healer in these private rooms, and would take advantage of her sexually, and claim that this was part of her healing. I eventually uncovered this deception. And when I uncovered the deception, nobody believed it at first. They didn't want to, but I had been saving proof and the transcripts, the proof that I have saved are actually in the book as my bonus material. So if you read the book, you can actually see the proof that I saved of what was happening. And when I unveiled all of this proof to the team, Amy and Michael went and spoke for a couple minutes after they finally admitted that Andrew's right. This was KG the whole time. This went on for months. And they came out and gave me the ultimatum to keep my mouth shut or leave the team because they didn't want anybody to know that it was proven that Amy's guides weren't real, because all her guides claimed that, everything that was going on was actually legit. And she didn't want to be exposed. And I didn't go along with it. I told our whole team members, I told the people online that followed, because I believed they had a right to the truth. And I wasn't going to be denied. I wasn't going to sell out. And it was through those experiences that I realized she had chosen control over love and light, that she had chosen, power over honesty. And that's what really fueled my desire to dismantle the falsehoods that she had created. And I also found my own power, my own authenticity in those moments, because she had been essentially cheating on me for months and lying to me about it, gaslighting me. And I found out my intuition was right. So through that, I found my power, I found my voice, I found my authenticity, and began speaking out to expose the cult.
Wow, that is one wild ride.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, having the courage to speak up is phenomenal. Not everyone would not only have the courage to do it, but the strength to then walk away from that cult, and a group that you had been so ingrained in. You had this like strong relationship with Amy, and having that moment where you say, I'm going to reclaim my power and walk away.
Right.
But then you get hit with another life event with stage 4 cancer diagnosis. How did you face that chapter? What role did your book play in that healing?
Wow. Um, the book itself, writing it was very difficult. It was very emotional for me. Um, the cancer was tough. That's one of the tougher things I've faced. Facing your own mortality, especially at 40 years old, is not something I would wish upon anybody. Um, it was difficult, but writing the book had the effect of making, because I had to go back and relive these experiences of being with the cult. And once I started writing them from a dispassionate place, years later, um, I had to look at everything I went through from this dispassionate lens where, in the moment when these things happen, your emotions and your energy almost, create defense mechanisms for yourself. And, you don't really see things as they are. But when you're writing about it years later and the emotion isn't there and you really look at it clear eyed, that's when you really begin to see things. And I realized there was so much of it that I hadn't truly processed. And in writing the book and reliving these experiences, I really began to process them and overcome them, see things in a new light. So writing the book really helped. And as far as cancer goes, when I began writing the book, it started while I was actually in the hospital receiving chemo. So it gave me something to look forward to. If I was going to lose my life to this fight, it was going to give me something to leave behind, because I felt like I had these incredibly unique stories that at least I could leave behind. There would be a piece of me left behind to tell my story that was very unique, and hopefully inspire others who obviously may have not have joined cults, but have found themselves, whether it be in a relationship or a job or a group of some kind, where they felt like they maybe were letting go bits of their true authenticity in order to adapt or to feel validated, to feel that sense of community or be accepted in that relationship or that job or that group. And by writing this book, I really wanted to hopefully inspire people to see that no matter what challenges they face, that it's through their authenticity that they can overcome their challenges, and that claiming your authenticity is by far and away the most important thing you can do. And that's the biggest mistake I made with cults, and that's what they prey on, is to take away your authenticity and to label their control and power as just you submitting to the belief system and serving a divine purpose. That's how they love bomb you. That's how they control you. But while I joined a cult and not many people do, a lot of the mechanisms can be similar that other people face in writing the book, whether it be cancer, the cult, or just any challenge that you see in life. It made me want to reach out and touch other people. And if I can even help just one person by writing this book, then I'll feel totally successful in the endeavor.
That's beautiful. I certainly appreciate too that you were able to recognize you had not processed everything from your experience in the cult. That even though
Yeah,
in the moment you were doing your best to make sense of it all and get out and reclaim your power, there was still a lot that you hadn't been able to really work through. And
lots.
sometimes that time and distance gives you literally the space to do it, and then the book, just getting it all out on paper, you're literally getting it out of your system, is so helpful.
No
I'm
doubt. As a cult survivor, and you don't realize how much has been taken from you, especially as far as your authenticity. You don't realize how much of yourself you've lost. And there's so many cult survivors who haven't found their voice and don't want to speak out, whether they're afraid, they don't want the backlash, or they're embarrassed. There isn't a lot of love for cult survivors that speak out. And it doesn't bother me a lot, but there's not a lot of love for me when I post on Reddit about my experiences, a little bit, and I make authentic connections, but I understand why a lot of people don't speak out. And I
Yeah.
really hope that this inspires them to see that it's worth it for them to take their power and speak out, and tell their story, because it's cathartic, and it will help them to reclaim the parts of themselves that they have lost because of joining that cult, and that have been taken from them, and they may not even realize that those
Mhm.
parts have been taken from them.
Yeah. Well, you have had a wild life so far. You've lived through addiction, spiritual awakening, cult leadership, and cancer, and now you help others reclaim their minds and voices. If someone listening today feels like they've lost themselves, what would you say to help them
Mm.
start coming home?
I would say that, while we haven't all been in a cult, obviously, we've all felt trapped, stuck, or in a place where we're looking for acceptance or validation, community, whether it be a job or a relationship. And uh, we search for meaning or purpose. Um, and I don't want people to think that their mistakes uh, define them. I don't want people to think that, they've made bad choices, so to speak, that define them. In your search to fit in, you've given yourself an opportunity to learn at the very worst. And there's no reason to define things in a bad way. I want people to see that each of us has been made with the abilities that we need to overcome our challenges. There's no bad things. There's really no mistakes. Just choices to be made. And I want people to understand that standing in your authenticity is where your power is. And if you do that, and just take one step in the direction that you want to move in every day, it'll be worth it. Just one step every day. Don't worry about the big picture. Just take one step, and eventually you'll look back and realize you've climbed a mountain.
Beautiful, beautiful. I couldn't agree more. Progress over perfection.
No doubt.
Andrew, thank you for sharing your story with such raw honesty and heart. You've reminded us that even when we're lost, we're never beyond the point of return, and that the
Never.
journey back to ourselves is the most powerful one we can take. And to our
No
free
doubt.
spirits out there, if you want more from Flying Upstream, including past episodes, updates, and what we're building next, head over to Flying Upstream podcast to learn more. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep flying upstream.